The Center for Regional Advancement in Virginia. This is the second forum that we've conducted on what's commonly referred to as the New York Act. I could read the whole title, but that could take at least 5 minutes. But the New York Act was basically streamlined the process for citizens to bring referendum on various government consolidation issues. Tonight, we're going to do things very similar to how we did it in Fredonia a few months ago. We're going to have a presentation on the process under the new law, and then we'll have a question and answer session based on that, just on the process of the new law and how it works. And then afterwards, obviously there's a vote coming up, and we're going to have a community discussion about the actual vote itself, so we can get into the pros and cons of the first step in the process of the vote. Sorry about that. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker this evening, Mr. David Sampson, the Deputy Attorney General for Regional Affairs. I'm thrilled that he was able to make it here tonight and take the time to travel down here to speak with us, as I was when he came to Fredonia earlier this year. David Sampson was appointed Deputy Attorney General for the Division of Regional Affairs in July of 2008. He originally was appointed Director of Regional Affairs for State Council in April 2008. Prior to his appointment, David was a civil trial lawyer in private practice for 25 years. Between 1999 and 2008, David was a partner with the firm of Underberg and Kessler, LLP, and the supervising partner of their Buffalo office. Prior to that, he was a partner with Jason and Sampson, PC, a firm led by former New York Court of Appeals Judge Matthew Jason. Mr. Sampson is a graduate of Canisius College and Albany Law School of Union University, where he was president of the Student Bar Association. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome David Sampson.
Thank you, Chuck, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. I'd like to especially thank Chuck and the SUNY Fredonia Center for Regional Advancement for inviting us here this evening, as well as the citizen group that is sponsoring the forum this evening. What I will be going through is a history of why the New York State Government Reorganization Act was introduced and passed by the legislature. It is because of that legislation that we are all here tonight. The other half of my presentation will explain how the law works and help you to better understand the process that you are in the midst right now. So let us begin. So why are we here tonight to talk about government reorganization? We're here because right now New York State has over 10,500 governmental entities. And the reason that there's an asterisk there is that no one can be definitely certain how many forms of government we have in layers within the state of New York. How did this occur? How do we end up with overlapping taxing boundaries? Well, here we have the map of the state of New York divided by the county boundaries. You then add to it the towns. You can then add to it villages, school districts, fire districts, water districts, school districts, public authorities, villages, and before you know it, you have a map that is radioactive. It was once stated too many units of local government exist in New York, resulting in the duplication of functions, overlapping areas, overlapping authority, and overlapping debt. Now the question I have is, When do you think that statement was made? 2009, 2010, 2008, as this bill was being introduced into the legislature? Well, the answer to that is no. It was stated in 1935. And that was at a time that a study was done that recommended in 1935, in the midst of the Great Depression, that New York could no longer afford the number of governmental entities that it had at that time in 1935, and that the people of the state should look at reorganizing their forms of government so that it did not imitate 18th century America, but instead evolved to 20th century America. Well, as you can see, in 1930, there were about 1,000 governmental units. And as I mentioned earlier, we are now at over 10,500. How did this occur? It occurred because of the great increase in the number of special districts in New York State. Following World War II, there was a population shift. A shift from cities to towns to villages, from cities to rural areas. And as the slide indicates, town populations increased 120% between 1950 and 1990, while cities actually declined. Not a surprise. But as the townships grew, so did the need for services. And as these areas grew, there was a need for special districts to be created to provide such thing as garbage, sewer, water. But it also brought along aquatic plant growth, duck waste. We have special districts for that. So how do we decide what level of government is necessary? Do we base it on population? Do you need a certain population level before a village should consider merging with a town, or a town should become a city, or all the above should become a city? Well, here's a couple of numbers: 56,000 and 5,379. 56,000 is the population of the village of Hempstead on Long Island, whereas 5,379 is the population of Hamilton County. Hamilton County has enough governmental units that there's one governmental unit for every 132 people. Let's look at a couple other numbers: 735,000, 755,000. 735,000 is nearby Monroe County. 755,000 is the town of Hempstead. So as you can see, a population isn't necessarily a determinant of what level of government is necessary. Commissions on local government. As I mentioned with the quote earlier, studies began back in 1935, and on a regular basis, they were reintroduced. In the 1970s, there was another study. In 1990, there was a study. In 2002, there was another study. And actually, Stan Lundeen was involved in the last study that occurred in 2007, 2008. And when that study came out, there was great belief that finally New York would address this issue. But like so many other studies before it ended up on a bookshelf. That was until this legislation. But why was the legislation necessary? Again, because we have so many levels of government that cause our property taxes to be the highest in the nation. So why not reorganize? Why not look to see whether consolidation, mergers, or modernization might actually help to lower property taxes? Property taxes in New York State are the highest of any state in the nation. We average per $1,000 over $70. The closest state to us is New Jersey, which is 50% lower. So the whole concept behind this exercise is, let's find ways to make government more efficient, to streamline, and to eliminate the overlap of services. The Center for Governmental Research has determined that property taxes can be reduced by anywhere from 5% to 22% when reorganization occurs. The reason the legislation was necessary was that the old law, as it had been amended over the course of many decades, made it literally impossible to accomplish what you are presently going through. Let's take a look at that. It literally was mission impossible. The charts you can see, and the print is too fine and I won't bore you by reading them, but what these schematic drawings show is not an electrical system for a skyscraper. It's the procedure that you would have to follow if you were a town looking to merge, if you were a village looking to merge or dissolve, if you wanted to consolidate fire protection districts. It was an impossible task. The laws, in order to accomplish this, were all over the place. They were in the town law, the village law, different sections of the miscellaneous districts law. So what the new law attempted to do was to streamline the process so that there was a uniform process that would be applicable for all types of dissolutions or consolidations. And a new Article 17A of the General Municipal Law was created for this purpose. So let's look at the old laws that existed and what the new law does. Under the old law, there were numerous inconsistent, confusing procedures that varied depending on the type of local government involved. Under the new law, it's a uniform, simplified, streamlined procedure for all consolidations and dissolutions. The old law had a confusing hyper-technical process that resulted oftentimes in litigation, disqualification of petitions, or whole petitions altogether. The new law clarifies and defines the petition process, creates an actual petition form that citizens can use, and allow them to be able to initiate consolidation or dissolution. Before, this was nearly impossible. The old law in 1970 actually disempowered counties, which previously had a constitutional authority to abolish local governmental entities. The new law allows counties, as a unit of local government, subject to certain conditions and countywide referendums, by the way, to abolish local governmental entities if they so choose. The old law also required that citizens own property before they could sign a petition and vote in certain consolidation and dissolution proceedings. The new law removes the pecuniary or property interest that a voter must have before they can sign a petition or participate in any vote to consolidate or dissolve a local governmental entity. The old law established different signature requirements depending on the kind of local governmental entity involved. For example, if you were looking to dissolve a village, you had to have 33% of the registered voters in the village sign a petition, whereas if it was for fire district, you needed 50%. But if it was a town, you only needed 5%. Made no sense. Under the Attorney General's law, there's a uniform signature requirement to initiate either consolidations or dissolutions. Now, under the new law, there are actually 3 different ways this can happen. And the way that the referendum in the village of Lakewood was initiated was through citizen involvement. So we'll cover that first. Under the law, 10% of the voters, or 5,000 people, whichever is less, can petition the local governing body. If they submit enough signatured petitions, it qualifies for a referendum. That is what's happened here in the village of Lakewood. And on August 25th, a vote will be held here If there is more than 50% in favor of it, then the process continues. And how does the process continue? It continues